Have you ever been so focused on leaving that you almost missed the reason to stay? That's exactly what happened to me on a cold October morning when the sound of masking tape being pulled off a roll was interrupted by 3 words that changed everything. I'm 29, thought I had life figured out, and was 12 hours away from driving to a new city when a woman 25 years older than me stood in my doorway and said something that made me question every decision I'd ever made. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Now, let me tell you about the morning that taught me the difference between running towards something and running from something. I'm Jake Thompson, and for the past 3 years, I've been living above Tom's Antique Restoration Shop on Main Street in Millbrook, Vermont. Population 4,200, where everyone knows your coffee order and your business. Not necessarily in that order. I used to think small towns were where dreams went to die. But after college, I found myself here, freelancing as a graphic designer from a 1-bedroom apartment that smelled like wood stain and old memories. Tom, my landlord, is this 70-year-old guy who can restore a 1920s armoire, but can't figure out how to use the internet to save his life. He's gruff, drinks too much coffee, and has opinions about everything from politics to the proper way to sand furniture. Most importantly, he minded his own business, which made him the perfect landlord for someone who just wanted to work quietly and save money. That morning I was surrounded by cardboard boxes, each one labeled in my obsessively neat handwriting. Kitchen, office, bedroom, miscellaneous junk I should probably throw away but won't. The Portland design agency had offered me a position that would triple my income and put me in a real city with real opportunities. Everything logical said I should be excited. Everything logical said this was the smart move for a guy who'd been treading water in a town where the biggest excitement was the annual Harvest Festival. But as I wrapped my computer monitor in bubble wrap, something felt wrong. Not wrong like I was making a mistake, but wrong like I was leaving something unfinished. I told myself it was just moving anxiety, the normal fear of change that hits everyone when they're about to leap into something new. I was shoving books into a box when I heard footsteps on the wooden stairs outside my apartment. Slow, deliberate steps that paused at my door. The knock was soft, almost hesitant. When I opened it, Linda Martinez stood there holding a covered casserole dish and wearing the kind of expression people get when they're about to say something they can't take back. Linda was my neighbor in the loosest sense. She lived 3 streets over in a yellow house with a pottery studio in the garage, taught art at the high school, and had helped me out of more computer disasters than I cared to admit. She was also newly divorced, 54 years old, and had this way of looking at the world like she was seeing colors other people missed. We'd met 4 months ago when she knocked on my door in a panic because her computer had crashed the night before a big presentation. I spent 2 hours recovering her files and teaching her basic backup procedures. And somehow that turned into her bringing me dinner once a week, and me helping her with various technology crises. She paid me in homemade enchiladas and conversations that made me forget I was supposed to be lonely. Linda had this laugh that started in her chest and worked its way up, and she talked with her hands like she was conducting an invisible orchestra. Her hair was more silver than black now, and she wore it in a way that suggested she'd stopped caring what other people thought about appropriate hairstyles for women her age. She dressed like an art teacher should, in flowing scarves and jewelry that looked like it had stories to tell. "I brought you something for the road," she said, holding up the dish. "Though I'm hoping you might be too polite to leave without eating it first." I stepped aside to let her in, and she looked around at the chaos of half-packed boxes and scattered belongings. Her face did something complicated, like she was trying to memorize the scene, or maybe trying to figure out how to change it. "It looks so final," she said quietly. "It is final. My flight's tomorrow morning." She nodded and set the casserole on my kitchen counter, which was really just a strip of laminate that separated my living room from the area where I kept my microwave and coffee maker. The apartment suddenly felt smaller with her in it. Not because she took up space, but because her presence made me aware of how little space I'd actually been living in. "Jake," she said, turning to face me with an expression I'd never seen before. "I need to tell you something, and I need you to let me say it all before you respond, okay?" Something in her tone made me stop wrapping dishes and give her my full attention. She looked nervous, which was unusual for Linda. She was typically the most self-possessed person I knew, the kind of woman who could handle a classroom full of teenagers or fix a broken pottery wheel without breaking a sweat. "I know this is terrible timing," she began, her hands fidgeting with the edge of her scarf. "I know you're leaving, and I know I should have said this weeks ago, but I've been talking myself out of it because it sounds crazy, and Rachel keeps telling me it's crazy. And maybe it is crazy, but I can't let you leave without knowing." She took a deep breath, and I found myself holding mine. "I'm 54 years old. My friends think I'm having some kind of midlife crisis. My brother thinks I'm rebounding from my divorce in the worst possible way. Everyone in this town probably has opinions about what I'm about to say, and honestly, I don't care anymore." Another pause. The apartment was so quiet I could hear Tom working on something downstairs, the rhythmic sound of sandpaper against wood. "I love you, Jake. I'm in love with you. And I know that's complicated and inconvenient, and probably the last thing you want to hear right now. But I needed you to know before you disappeared into your new life." The words hung in the air between us like something physical, something I could reach out and touch if I wanted to. I stared at her, trying to process what she'd just said, while my brain simultaneously tried to calculate whether this was the most wonderful or most terrifying thing that had ever happened to me. Linda's cheeks were flushed, but she held my gaze steadily, like she was prepared for whatever came next. She looked vulnerable in a way I'd never seen before, but also stronger. Somehow, like saying the words out loud had freed her from carrying them alone. "I know it's a lot," she continued when I didn't immediately respond. "I know the age thing is weird for people. I know you probably see me as this older woman who makes you dinner and helps you feel less lonely in a small town. But these past few months, getting to know you, watching you work, listening to you talk about your dreams and your fears and the way you see the world, I realized something was happening that I wasn't expecting." She moved closer to where I was standing, surrounded by boxes and bubble wrap and the evidence of a life being dismantled. "You make me feel like myself again, Jake. Not the divorced woman or the high school teacher or the 50-something person everyone expects me to be. Just me. And I hope, that maybe I do something similar for you." I opened my mouth to say something, but she held up a hand. "I'm not asking you to change your plans. I'm not asking you to stay or to feel the same way or to do anything at all, really. I just needed you to know that someone in this little town is going to miss you, in a way that has nothing to do with computer help, and everything to do with the fact that you're the first person in a long time who's made me remember what it feels like to want something for myself." The silence that followed felt enormous. Outside, I could hear the normal sounds of Millbrook going about its business. Cars passing on Main Street, someone's dog barking, the distant sound of the school bell marking the end of another day. Inside my apartment, everything had shifted into something new and unfamiliar. I looked at Linda, really looked at her, and realized that somewhere between teaching her about cloud storage and listening to her stories about her students, I'd started looking forward to her visits in a way that had nothing to do with the free food. She'd become the best part of my weeks, the person I found myself thinking about when I was working late or walking through town. I'd told myself it was friendship, that the warmth I felt when she laughed at my jokes or asked my opinion about her latest pottery project was just the normal comfort of having someone who cared about my day. But standing there, with her confession still echoing in the small space between us, I realized I'd been lying to myself about a lot of things. "Linda," I started, and then stopped, because I wasn't sure what came next. She smiled, and it was sad and hopeful at the same time. "It's okay, Jake. I just needed to say it. I needed you to know that this time we've spent together has meant something, at least to me." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. She turned toward the door, and I felt something inside me panic at the thought of her leaving. Not just leaving my apartment, but leaving this conversation unfinished, leaving me to get on a plane tomorrow with her words as the only thing I'd be thinking about for the next 1,000 miles. "Wait," I said, and she stopped with her hand on the doorknob. "Can you stay? Can we talk about this?" She turned back, eyebrows raised in surprise. "Are you sure? I don't want to make this harder for you." "I think it's already hard," I admitted. "I think it's been hard for a while, and I've been too focused on my exit strategy to notice. Linda came back into the kitchen area and leaned against the counter, still keeping some distance between us, but no longer heading for the door. The late afternoon light coming through my windows caught the silver in her hair and made her look like someone from a painting, someone worth staying for. "Tell me what you're thinking," she said softly. I looked around at the boxes, at the evidence of a plan I'd been working toward for months, at the life I was supposed to want. Then I looked back at her, at this woman who just had the courage to risk everything for the chance of something real. "I'm thinking," I said slowly, "that I might have been packing to run away from the wrong things." The conversation that followed was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. We sat on my couch, which was really just a second-hand love seat I'd bought from Tom's shop, and talked until the sun disappeared behind the maple trees outside my window. Linda told me about her marriage, 25 years of slowly becoming someone she didn't recognize, of compromise that had turned into surrender. She talked about the divorce, how it felt like waking up from a dream she hadn't realized she was having, and how terrifying and liberating it was to suddenly be responsible only for her own happiness. I found myself telling her things I'd never said out loud. How I'd come to Millbrook not because I wanted to be in a small town, but because I was running from the pressure of trying to make it in Boston. How my freelance work was steady, but not passionate. How I'd been telling myself that Portland would fix whatever was broken in my motivation, when really I was just afraid of admitting I didn't know what I wanted. "You know what's funny?" Linda G. said, curled up on the opposite end of the couch with her legs tucked under her. "I spent so many years being the person everyone expected me to be. The good wife, the dedicated teacher, the woman who never caused problems or asked for too much. And now, for the first time in my adult life, I'm doing something purely because I want to, and everyone thinks I've lost my mind." "Maybe losing your mind isn't such a bad thing," I said. "Maybe your mind was the problem." She laughed, and the sound filled my apartment in a way that made me realize how quiet my life had been before she started visiting. We ordered pizza from Mario's, the only place in town that delivered after 8, and continued talking while eating directly from the box like college students. Linda had marinara sauce on her chin, and when I pointed it out, she wiped it off, with the back of her hand in a way that was so unself-conscious it made my chest tight. "What are you afraid of?" she asked me sometime around 10 o'clock, after we'd moved on to discussing everything from our childhood pets to our theories about why small towns either crush people or save them. The question caught me off guard. About what? About staying, about me, about this. She gestured between us, and I knew she meant whatever had been building between us over the past 4 months. I thought about it, really thought about it, while she waited patiently for my answer. I'm afraid of making decisions based on feelings, instead of logic. I'm afraid of disappointing people. I'm afraid of being the kind of person who changes his entire life plan because a beautiful woman told him she loved him. And what's wrong with being that kind of person? Nothing, I guess. Everything. I don't know. I rubbed my hands through my hair, a nervous habit I'd had since childhood. I'm afraid of what people will think. The age thing. The small town. Gossip. The fact that you just got divorced, and maybe this is just a rebound thing that'll burn out in 6 months. Linda nodded slowly, like she'd expected these concerns. Those are all valid fears. They're also all about other people's opinions and future possibilities instead of what's actually happening right now. What's happening right now? She shifted closer to me on the couch, close enough that I could smell her perfume. Something warm and spicy that reminded me of autumn leaves. Right now, I'm sitting in your apartment at 10:30 on a Tuesday night, and I'm happier than I've been in years. Right now, you're supposed to be packing for the biggest opportunity of your career, but instead, you're here with me, talking about things that matter. Right now, we're both adults who get to choose what we want, regardless of what anyone else thinks about it. She was right, of course, but being right and being easy are two different things. I don't know how to do this, I admitted. I don't know how to be with someone like you. Someone like me? Someone confident. Someone who knows who she is. Someone who's lived enough life to have real stories and real scars. I'm 29, Linda. I've never been married, never owned a house, never even had a relationship that lasted longer than 2 years. What could I possibly offer someone who's already figured out how to be a grown-up? The look she gave me was so tender it almost hurt. Jake, you think I have it all figured out? I'm 54, and I just realized 6 months ago that I don't even know what my favorite color is anymore, because I spent so long choosing things based on what worked best for everyone else. You think confidence is about age? I'm terrified every single day. I'm terrified of being alone, terrified of not being alone, terrified of making another mistake, terrified of being too scared to take chances. She reached over and took my hand, and her fingers were warm and steady. You know what you offer someone like me? You see me. Not the teacher version or the ex-wife version or the middle-aged woman version. You see the person who still gets excited about finding the perfect shade of blue for a pottery glaze, who laughs too loud at bad movies, who stayed up until 3 in the morning last week reading a book because I couldn't put it down. You remind me that I'm still allowed to be curious and silly and passionate about things. We sat holding hands in the dim light of my living room, surrounded by boxes that represented a future I'd been planning for months. Outside, Millbrook was settling into its nighttime quiet, the kind of deep silence that only happens in small towns after the last dog has been walked and the last porch light has been turned off. I should go, Linda said eventually, but she didn't move to leave. You should, I agreed, but I didn't let go of her hand. This is complicated, Jake. It is. People are going to talk. They probably are. Rachel is going to say I told you so about the midlife crisis thing. Rachel sounds like she has strong opinions. Linda laughed softly. Rachel has opinions about everything. She's my best friend and my harshest critic, usually in the same conversation. She thinks I'm confusing loneliness with love and that you're too young to know what you want. What do you think? I think Rachel has never looked at someone and felt like she could see the rest of her life in their smile. I think she's never had a conversation that made her lose track of time, or met someone who made her want to be braver than she actually is. The words hung between us, honest and vulnerable, and impossible to take back. I looked at our joined hands, her skin slightly rougher than mine from years of working with clay and teenagers, and realized that something fundamental had shifted in my understanding of what I wanted from life. I need to tell you something, I said. I've been lying to myself about why I'm leaving. What do you mean? The job in Portland is good, but it's not my dream job. It's safe. It's what someone with my skills should want, but it's not what I want. I've been here for 3 years, and I've been happy, really happy, for the first time since college. But I convinced myself that being happy in a small town wasn't enough, that I needed to want more than what I had. Linda squeezed my hand. And now? Now I'm wondering if maybe wanting more doesn't have to mean wanting something different. Maybe it means wanting what you have, but deeper. We talked until almost midnight, and when Linda finally left, she kissed me. It wasn't dramatic or desperate or anything like the movies. It was soft and careful and tasted like the peppermint tea we'd been drinking. It was the kind of kiss that asked a question instead of making a statement. And when she pulled away, I realized I knew the answer. I'm not getting on that plane tomorrow, I said. Jake, don't make this decision because of me. Don't change your life because I was brave enough to say something stupid. I'm not changing my life because of you, I said. I'm changing it because of me. Because for the first time in 3 years, I know what I want. And it's not in Portland. She smiled, and it was the kind of smile that made me understand why people write songs about moments like this. What do you want? I want to stay here. I want to see what happens if I stop running toward the next thing and start paying attention to what's right in front of me. I want to keep having conversations that last until midnight. I want to learn how to make pottery and teach you how to use Excel properly. I want to find out what it's like to be with someone who makes me want to be the best version of myself. Those are good wants, she said softly. They are. The next morning, I called the design agency in Portland and declined their offer. It was one of the most terrifying phone calls I'd ever made, but also one of the most honest. I told them I'd realized I wasn't ready to leave my current situation, which was true enough. They were disappointed but professional about it, and they told me to call if I ever changed my mind. Then I called the airline and canceled my flight, which cost me $200 in fees, but saved me from making what I was increasingly certain would have been the biggest mistake of my life. Tom was in his workshop when I went downstairs. to tell him I wouldn't be moving out after all. He was restoring a Victorian-era rocking chair, carefully removing layers of old paint with a heat gun and a scraper. "Change of plans?" he asked without looking up from his work. "Something like that." The Martinez woman? Tom had a way of knowing everything that happened within a 6-block radius of his shop without appearing to pay attention to anything but furniture. "How did you know?" "She brought you dinner last night and didn't come back out for 4 hours. Either you two were planning a bank robbery, or someone finally got honest about something." I sat down on an overturned crate and watched him work. Tom had been doing furniture restoration for 40 years, and there was something meditative about the way he approached each piece, like he could see the original beauty hiding under decades of neglect and damage. "You think I'm making a mistake?" I asked. "I think you're 29 years old, and 29-year-olds are supposed to make mistakes. Better to make them doing something that scares you than something that bores you." "She's 25 years older than me." So people are going to have opinions about that." Tom finally looked up from the rocking chair, squinting at me through his safety glasses. "Jake, I'm 70 years old. You know what I've learned in 7 decades of listening to people's opinions about other people's business?" "What?" "Most people don't know what the hell they're talking about, especially when it comes to love. They're too busy trying to figure out their own lives to have any useful insight into yours." He went back to scraping paint, and I sat there thinking about the difference between advice from someone who'd lived long enough to know something and opinions from people who just liked having things to say. "Besides," Tom added, "that woman makes you smile more than you've smiled in the 3 years you've been living upstairs. That's worth something." I spent the rest of the morning unpacking boxes and putting my apartment back together. It felt like the opposite of moving, like I was settling into a life instead of preparing to leave one. By noon, word had somehow gotten around town that I wasn't leaving after all. Casey, my neighbor who worked at the post office and knew everyone's business before they knew it themselves, knocked on my door around lunchtime. "So, you're staying," she said, not really asking. "I'm staying. Because of Linda Martinez. Because of a lot of things." Casey nodded knowingly. "Good for you. That woman's been walking around like a ghost since her divorce. Nice to see. Someone making her remember she's alive." That afternoon, I walked over to the high school to find Linda. She was in her art classroom, helping a student with a clay sculpture that looked like it was supposed to be a horse, but resembled more of an abstract interpretation of the concept of horse. She looked up when I appeared in the doorway, and her face went through several expressions in quick succession: surprise, hope, worry, and something that might have been joy. "Shouldn't you be on a plane right now?" she asked. Turns out I had more important places to be. The student looked back and forth between us with the kind of interest that only teenagers can muster when they sense adult drama. Linda walked over to me, wiping clay from her hands on a towel. "Jake, please tell me you didn't do something stupid." "I did something terrifying. Whether it's stupid remains to be seen." She searched my face, looking for something I hoped she'd find. "You really stayed." "I really stayed." "Why?" "Because you were right about what's happening right now being more important than what might happen later. Because I've spent 3 years in this town without really living in it, and I want to see what it's like to actually be here, instead of just waiting to leave." The student had given up any pretense of working on her sculpture and was openly eavesdropping now. Linda noticed and gave her a look that sent her back to her clay with renewed focus. "And because," I continued more quietly, "I want to find out what it's like to be loved by someone brave enough to say so." Linda's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "That's a good reason." "I thought so." She stepped closer. Close, enough that I could see the flecks of clay dust on her hands and the small scar near her left eyebrow that I'd never noticed before. "So what happens now?" "Now I guess we figure it out as we go." "That sounds terrifying." "It does. And wonderful. That too." We stood there grinning at each other like teenagers while her actual teenage students pretended not to watch us and failed completely. Finally, Linda laughed and shook her head. "I can't believe you stayed. I can't believe it took me this long to realize I wanted to." That evening, Linda invited me over for dinner at her house for the first time. I'd helped her with computer, Problems plenty of times, but always at my apartment or the coffee shop downtown. Walking into her space felt like crossing some kind of threshold, like we were officially acknowledging that this thing between us was real and worth exploring. Her house was exactly what I'd expected, and nothing like I'd imagined at the same time. It was small and cozy, with hardwood floors and built-in bookshelves and the kind of comfortable clutter that comes from actually living in a space instead of just decorating it. There were student art projects on her refrigerator, stacks of books on every surface, and pottery pieces in various stages of completion scattered around like evidence of a creative life in progress. "Sorry about the mess," she said, moving a pile of papers from the kitchen table. "I wasn't expecting company when I left for work this morning." "It's perfect," I said, and I meant it. The house felt alive in a way that my sparse apartment never had, full of colors and textures and the accumulated evidence of interests and passions and a life being actively lived. Dinner was simple: pasta with a sauce she'd made from tomatoes in her garden, salad with herbs she'd grown on her windowsill, and wine that her brother had brought back from a trip to California. We ate at her kitchen table while rain started pattering against the windows, and I realized this was what I'd been missing without knowing it. Not just the food or the company, but the sense of being part of someone else's daily life, of mattering, enough to be invited into the ordinary moments. "Tell me about your students," I said as we cleaned up dishes together. "They're wonderful and exhausting and smarter than they know," Linda said, handing me a plate to dry. "They think they're so sophisticated, but they're still just kids trying to figure out who they are. I love watching them discover that they can create something beautiful, even when they start out convinced they have no talent." "Sounds familiar." She looked at me curiously. "How so?" "Someone convincing themselves they're not capable of something beautiful when maybe they just haven't given themselves permission to try." Linda stopped washing dishes and turned to face me fully. "Are we still talking about my students?" "Maybe, maybe not." She reached up and touched my face, her fingers still damp from the dishwater. "You know what I realized today, after you showed up at my classroom?" "What?" "I spent so many years being afraid of wanting things that seemed impossible or impractical. I convinced myself that being reasonable was the same thing as being mature. But standing there looking at you, knowing you'd changed your entire life plan because of something I'd been brave enough to say, I realized that maybe the most mature thing I can do is admit that I want this. I want you. I want to see what happens when two people decide to be brave at the same time." We finished the dishes in comfortable silence, moving around each other in her kitchen like we'd been doing it for years instead of for the first time. When everything was clean and put away, she made tea and we sat on her couch, which was covered in a soft throw blanket and surrounded by more books than any one person could reasonably read in a lifetime. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, noticing that I'd gotten quiet. "I'm thinking about how different this feels from anything I've ever experienced. How easy it is to be here with you. How it doesn't feel like work or performance or trying to be someone I'm not. It feels natural." "It does, and that scares me a little, because I keep waiting for it to get complicated or difficult, or for one of us to realize we've made a mistake." Linda set down her tea and turned to face me on the couch. "Jake, it is going to get complicated. We're two people with different histories and different ways of seeing the world, and we're going to disagree about things and annoy each other and have to figure out how to navigate family and friends and all the practical realities of building something together. That's not particularly reassuring." She laughed. "But here's the thing. Complicated doesn't mean wrong. It just means real. And I'd rather have something real and complicated with you than something easy and empty with someone else." We talked until late again. But this time we were on her couch instead of mine, surrounded by her books and her pottery, and the evidence of a life I was starting to imagine myself being part of. When it got to be past midnight, I stood to leave, but Linda caught my hand. "Stay," she said softly. "Linda, not like that. I mean, someday like that, but not tonight. Tonight, just stay. Sleep in the guest room, wake up here tomorrow. Let me make you coffee and see what it feels like to start a day together instead of ending one." I looked at her, at this woman who'd been brave enough to risk everything for the possibility of something real, and realized that maybe it was time for me to be brave too. "Okay," I said. "I'll stay." Waking up in Linda's guest room was like surfacing from a dream I didn't want to end. The room was small but comfortable, with pale yellow walls and a window that looked out onto her backyard garden. Sunlight filtered through white curtains, and I could hear the sound of coffee brewing and something sizzling in a pan downstairs. For a moment, I lay there trying to remember the last time I'd woken up somewhere that felt like home instead of just a place to sleep. The guest room was clearly Linda's creative overflow space. There were canvases leaning against one wall, some finished paintings of local landscapes. Others just started with bold brushstrokes of color that looked like emotions trying to find their shape. A small bookshelf held art books and novels with broken spines, the kind of books that get read multiple times. On the nightstand was a pottery piece that looked like it was in progress. A small bowl with an interesting glaze pattern that caught the morning light. I got dressed and headed downstairs, following the smell of coffee and what turned out to be French toast. Linda was at the stove wearing an oversized sweater and jeans, her hair pulled back in a messy bun, humming something under her breath. She looked younger in the morning light, or maybe just more relaxed, like sleep had smoothed away the careful composure she wore during the day. "Morning," I said, and she turned with a smile that made my chest do something complicated. "How did you sleep?" "Better than I have in months." She handed me a mug of coffee, and our fingers brushed as I took it. Such a small thing, but it felt significant somehow. Like we were establishing new patterns of intimacy that would become part of our normal routine. "I hope you're hungry," she said, gesturing toward the stove where thick slices of bread were turning golden in a pan. I may have overestimated how much food two people can eat for breakfast. We sat at her kitchen table eating French toast with real maple syrup and talking about nothing important. She told me about the dream she'd had about trying to teach a pottery class to a room full of cats. I told her about waking up confused about where I was until I smelled the coffee. It was domestic and easy, and felt like something we'd been doing for years instead of for the first time. "I have to ask you something," Linda said as we finished eating. "And I want you to be honest, even if you think it might hurt my feelings. Okay. Do you think this is crazy, really? Not the age thing, not what other people think, but just us, this situation, the timing of everything." I thought about it while I finished my coffee. I think falling in love is always crazy. I think making major life decisions based on feelings instead of spreadsheets is crazy. I think two people deciding to trust each other enough to see what happens next is probably the most insane thing humans do on a regular basis. That's not exactly reassuring. I'm not done. I also think that all the best things I've ever done have been at least a little bit crazy. Moving to Millbrook was crazy. Starting my own business was crazy. Staying here instead of taking a safe job in Portland is definitely crazy. But the non-crazy choices I've made, the safe ones, the logical ones, those are the ones I regret. Linda reached across the table and took my hand. "So, you're saying we should lean into the crazy?" "I'm saying maybe crazy is just another word for brave." After breakfast, Linda had to go to school, and I had work to catch up on since I'd spent the previous day dramatically reconsidering my entire life plan. We stood in her front hallway, and there was this moment of awkwardness, like we were both trying to figure out the appropriate way to say goodbye in this new configuration of whatever we were to each other. "This is weird, isn't it?" Linda said, laughing. "The morning after deciding to completely change the trajectory of our lives, and we're standing here like teenagers trying to figure out how to end a first date." "A little bit," I admitted, "but good weird." She stepped closer and kissed me, and it was different from the night before. Less careful, more certain. When she pulled away, she was smiling. "I'll see you later?" "Definitely." I walked back to my apartment above Tom's shop, feeling like the world had shifted slightly on its axis. Everything looked the same. The same trees lining Main Street, the same storefronts, the same people heading to work. But my relationship to all of it had changed. Instead of seeing Millbrook as the place I was temporarily living until something better came along, I was seeing it as home. Tom was in his workshop when I got back, working on what appeared to be a dining room set from the 1940s. He looked up when I walked in, took one look at my face, and nodded approvingly. "Good choice," he said, and went back to his sanding. I spent the morning working on a logo design for a local bakery, but I kept getting distracted by the sound of my phone, not because it was ringing, but because I kept hoping it would. Around noon, Linda texted me a photo of her lunch, which was a sad-looking cafeteria sandwich and an apple with the message, "Living the glamorous teacher life." I texted back a photo of my lunch, which was leftover pizza from the night before, with "Living the glamorous freelancer life." She responded with a laughing emoji and, "We're quite the power couple." It was such a small exchange, but it made me realize how much I'd been missing having someone to share the mundane moments with. The little jokes and observations that only matter because someone else finds them worth sharing. That afternoon, I decided to take a walk through town, partially to clear my head, partially to see if the decision I'd made in the dramatic heat of the moment still felt right in the cold light of day. I ended up at the Millbrook Community Garden, a patch of land behind the library where residents could rent small plots to grow vegetables and flowers. I'd walked by it dozens of times but never really paid attention. Now I found myself wandering through the narrow paths between raised beds, looking at the late-season vegetables and the elaborate scarecrow that someone had dressed in a business suit and tie. There was something peaceful about it, this evidence of people putting down roots, literally and figuratively, in a place they planned to stay. "Jake?" I turned to find Rachel approaching from the direction of the library. I recognized her immediately from Linda's descriptions. Mid-50s, gray haircut and a practical bob, wearing a cardigan that looked like it had survived several decades of New England winters. She had the kind of face that suggested she had opinions about everything and wasn't shy about sharing them. "I'm Rachel Porter," she said, extending a hand. "Linda's mentioned you." "Nice to meet you," I said, though I had a feeling this wasn't going to be a casual social encounter. "I hear you decided not to move to Portland after all." Word traveled fast in small towns. "That's right." Rachel nodded, studying me with the kind of attention people usually reserved for used cars they were thinking about buying. "Linda says it's because of her. It's because of a lot of things. But she's one of them." "She's one of them," I admitted. Rachel gestured toward a bench near the edge of the garden, and we sat down. She was quiet for a moment, watching a group of elementary school kids playing in the playground across the street. "I need to ask you something," she said finally. "And I hope you'll forgive me for being direct, but Linda's my best friend and she's been through enough disappointment lately." "Okay, are you serious about this? About her? Or is this some kind of quarter-life crisis thing where you're rebelling against your nice, sensible life plan by getting involved with an older woman?" The question was blunt, but not unkind. I could hear the protectiveness in it, the love for Linda that made Rachel willing to have an uncomfortable conversation with a near stranger. "I understand why you'd be concerned," I said. "And I can't prove to you that I'm serious, because I literally made this decision yesterday. But I can tell you that Linda isn't some rebellion against my sensible life plan. She is my sensible life plan. She's the first thing that's made sense to me in years." Rachel's expression softened slightly. "Linda said you were thoughtful. She didn't mention you were also good with words." "I'm a graphic designer. Words are part of the job." "What do you know about her marriage?" "I know it ended badly. I know she spent a lot of years being someone other people expected her to be." "Do you know why it ended?" I hesitated. Linda had told me some things about her divorce, but I wasn't sure how much of that was meant to be shared with her best friend. "I know enough to understand that she's been hurt. I know enough to want to be different from whatever came before." Rachel nodded slowly. Her ex-husband was a good man, in theory. Steady job, responsible, never cheated or gambled or did any of the dramatic things that end marriages in movies. But he also never really saw her. He saw the role she played, the wife, the teacher, the woman who kept everything running smoothly. But he never seemed particularly interested in who she actually was underneath all that. She turned to look at me directly. "Linda's been invisible for a long time, Jake. And now, for the first time in years, she feels seen. That's a powerful thing, and it can make people fall in love with the feeling instead of the person." "Are you saying she's not really in love with me?" "I'm saying, I don't know yet, and neither do you. And that's okay, as long as you're both honest about it." We sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, watching the kids on the playground and the late afternoon light slanting through the maple trees. "Can I tell you something?" Rachel said eventually. "Sure." I haven't seen Linda laugh the way she's been laughing lately in probably 10 years. Whatever this is between you two, it's good for her. Just don't break her heart while she's still figuring out how to put it back. Together. I don't plan to. Nobody ever plans to break someone's heart. That's what makes it so dangerous. That evening, Linda and I met for dinner at the Bluebird Diner, Millbrook's answer to a fancy restaurant. Which is to say, it had tablecloths and served wine with dinner, even if the wine came from a bottle with a screw-top cap and the tablecloths had seen better decades. We sat in a booth by the window, sharing a plate of the diner's famous meatloaf and talking about our days. Linda told me about the sophomore who'd finally figured out perspective in his drawing, and the senior who was applying to art school against her parents' wishes. I told her about the logo project and my conversation with Rachel. She interrogated, "You, didn't she?" Linda said, not looking particularly surprised. "A little bit. I think she's just looking out for you." Rachel's been my reality check since college. She's the one who told me I was settling when I got engaged the first time. She's the one who suggested I take the teaching job here instead of following my ex to his job in Hartford. She's usually right about things, which is both helpful and annoying. What does she think about us? Linda picked at her mashed potatoes, considering the question. She thinks I'm rebounding. She thinks you're too young to know what you want. She thinks we're both acting on emotion instead of logic. Those are all reasonable concerns. They are. She's also worried that I'm confusing being seen with being loved, and that you're confusing being needed with being in love. I thought about that while we finished dinner. There was probably some truth to it. Linda was the first person in a long time who'd made me feel useful in a way that went beyond professional skills. And I was probably the first person in years who'd paid attention to her as something other than a teacher, or an ex-wife, or a daughter, or any of the other roles she'd been playing. "Do you think she's right?" I asked. "I think she's partially right. I think there's definitely an element of both of those things in what we're feeling. But I also think that's how most relationships start, with people filling needs for each other, meeting each other where they are instead of where they wish they were." After dinner, we walked through downtown Millbrook, past the shops that were already closed for the evening and the few restaurants that were still serving late dinners. The town was quiet in the way that small towns get quiet after dark, with most people already home watching television or helping kids with homework. "Jake," Linda said as we passed the bookstore, "can I ask you something?" "Always." "When you think about the future now, what do you see?" It was a big question, the kind that required an honest answer even if honesty felt dangerous. I thought about it as we continued walking, our footsteps echoing slightly on the empty sidewalk. I see mornings like this morning. I see learning how to make pottery and teaching you how to build a website for the art department. I see figuring out how to run a business from a small town and maybe taking on some local clients instead of just working for people I never meet. I see Sunday mornings and grocery shopping and all the boring domestic stuff that never seemed appealing when I was by myself. We stopped walking and faced each other under a streetlight outside the post office. "What do you see?" I asked. "I see someone to travel with. I see having a reason to cook real dinners instead of eating cereal over the sink. I see art projects and inside jokes and someone who cares about my day. I see feeling young again, but in a good way. Not trying to recapture something that's gone, but remembering that I'm still allowed to want things." She stepped closer, close enough that I could see the reflection of the streetlight in her eyes. "I also see complications. I see my family having opinions and your family having questions. I see people in town talking and students being curious, and all the ways that real life is going to test whether this thing between us is strong enough to handle outside pressure. Are you worried about that?" Terrified, but also excited. Does that make sense? It did make sense. It made perfect sense. We walked back to her house holding hands, and when we got to her front door, I realized I didn't want the evening to end. Not just because I was enjoying her company, but because going back to my apartment felt like stepping backward into a life that no longer fit. "Stay again tonight," Linda said, reading my mind. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure. We don't have to rush anything, but I like having you here. I like the way the house feels when you're in it." So I stayed again, in the guest room with the yellow walls and the morning light, and woke up to the smell of coffee and the sound of Linda moving around downstairs. It was starting to feel like a routine, like something we'd been doing long. Enough for it to become natural. Over breakfast, Linda mentioned that her brother Miguel was coming to visit that weekend. He lives in Boston, works in finance, has very strong opinions about most things, she said, buttering a piece of toast. Fair warning. Should I be worried? He's protective. He thinks I'm being impulsive and self-destructive. He also thinks I should have stayed married to David and worked harder to make it work. David was your ex-husband? David was my ex-husband. Miguel liked him because David was stable and predictable and never caused any family drama. Miguel does not like change or uncertainty, or anything that disrupts the established order of things. I could already tell that meeting Miguel was going to be interesting. How much does he know about me? He knows I've been seeing someone. He knows you're younger than me. He knows I'm happier than I've been in years, which he finds suspicious rather than encouraging. So he's coming to investigate. He's coming to investigate. Linda reached across the table and took my hand. Jake, I want you to meet him, but I also want you to know that whatever he says or thinks, it doesn't change anything between us. I spent too many years making decisions based on what other people thought was best for me. I'm not going back to that. Even if he's right, even if this is impulsive and we're moving too fast, even then. Because even if we're making a mistake, it's our mistake to make. That afternoon, I had lunch with Casey, my neighbor who seemed to know everything that happened in Millbrook before it actually happened. We met at the coffee shop downtown, and she immediately started peppering me with questions about Linda, and my decision to stay and whether I was prepared for the inevitable small-town gossip. People are talking, you know, Casey said, stirring sugar into her latte. Not in a mean way, mostly. Just curious. Linda Martinez and the young guy from Tom's place. It's the most interesting thing that's happened here since the mayor got caught putting campaign signs on private property. What are they saying? Mostly that they're happy for Linda. She's been kind of isolated since her divorce, and people like seeing her smile again. There's some concern about the age thing, but not as much as you might expect. This is a town that's seen stranger relationships work out just fine. Casey leaned forward conspiratorially. There's also a betting pool about whether you'll be engaged by Christmas. There's a betting pool? Started by Harold at the hardware store. Current odds are in your favor if that makes you feel better. I wasn't sure if it made me feel better or more pressured, but it definitely made me realize how public our relationship had become, without either of us really thinking about it. In a city, two people dating was barely noteworthy. In a town of 4,200 people, it was entertainment. Can I give you some unsolicited advice? Casey asked. Sure. Don't try too hard to prove that this isn't what it looks like. People are going to have opinions no matter what you do. The best thing you can do is just be yourselves and let the relationship speak for itself. That evening, Linda and I tried our first official date. Not dinner at her house or coffee between her teaching schedule, but an actual planned evening out. We drove to the next town over and went to a movie, partly because we wanted to do something normal, and partly because we wanted to go somewhere we wouldn't run into everyone we knew. The movie was a romantic comedy that was better than we expected, and afterward we got ice cream and walked around the small downtown area. It felt like being teenagers, except with the emotional awareness and financial stability of adults. This is nice, Linda said, as we sat on a bench outside the ice cream shop. Just being a couple out on a normal date. It is nice. Although I have to say, I'm kind of looking forward to getting back to Millbrook and not having to worry about running into people who want to analyze our body language. You noticed that too? Hard to miss. I think the woman behind us in line at the movies took a picture of us holding hands. We drove back to Millbrook with the windows down and the radio playing softly, talking about the movie and planning what we wanted to do the next weekend. It was comfortable and easy and felt like something we'd been doing for months instead of days. When we got back to Linda's house, we sat on her front porch drinking wine and talking about everything and nothing. The conversation drifted from her students to my work to our families to the weird way that small towns could make you feel both supported and scrutinized at the same time. Jake, Linda said as we were finishing our wine, I need to tell you something. Okay. I'm falling in love with you. Not just attracted to you or infatuated with the idea of you, but actually falling in love. And it's happening faster than I expected, and it's scaring me. But I wanted you to know. I set down my wine glass and looked at her. This woman who'd been brave enough to change both our lives with a single honest conversation. I'm falling in love with you too, I said. And you're right, it's terrifying. But it's also the best thing that's happened to me in longer than I can remember. We sat there on her front porch, admitting that we were falling in love like it was both the most natural and the most extraordinary thing in the world. And maybe that's exactly what it was. Miguel arrived on a Friday afternoon in a rental car that looked like it had been detailed that morning. I watched from my apartment window as he got out and straightened his tie before walking up to Linda's front door. He was taller than I'd expected, with graying hair and the kind of confident posture that came from years of making decisions that affected other people's money. Even from a distance, I could tell he was the type of person who had opinions about proper investment portfolios and the correct way to fold fitted sheets. Linda had texted me that morning to let me know Miguel had landed and that she'd invited him to dinner at her house that evening. She'd also mentioned, almost casually, that she'd told him I'd be joining them. The message ended with, "Don't worry, he's mostly harmless," which wasn't exactly the reassurance I'd been hoping for. I spent the afternoon working on a website design for a local veterinary clinic, but I kept glancing at the clock and trying to imagine how the conversation was going across town. Were they talking about me? Was Miguel grilling Linda about my intentions and financial prospects? Was he trying to convince her that this whole thing was a rebound mistake that she'd regret in 6 months? At 5:30, I put on what I hoped were the right clothes for meeting your girlfriend's protective older brother. Not too casual, which might suggest I didn't take the situation seriously, but not too formal, which might suggest I was trying too hard. I settled on dark jeans and a button-down shirt, the kind of outfit that said I was responsible, but not uptight. The walk to Linda's house felt longer than usual. I found myself rehearsing potential conversations in my head, trying to anticipate the kinds of questions Miguel might ask, and preparing answers that would make me sound mature and stable, and worthy of his sister's affection. By the time I reached her front door, I'd worked myself into a state of mild panic about the whole evening. Linda answered the door before I could knock, like she'd been watching for me from the window. She was wearing a dress I'd never seen before, something blue and elegant that made her look like she was hosting a dinner party, instead of mediating a potentially awkward family meeting. "You look nervous," she said, kissing me on the cheek. "I am nervous. He's going to love you. You don't sound entirely convinced of that yourself." "He's going to learn to love you," she amended. "Eventually." Miguel was in the living room, standing by the bookshelf and examining the titles like he was conducting some kind of literary background check. When Linda led me in, he turned and extended his hand with a smile that was polite but didn't quite reach his eyes. "You must be Jake," he said. "I've heard quite a lot about you." "Nice to meet you, Miguel. Linda's told me wonderful things about you too." We shook hands, and I could feel him taking my measure in that brief contact. His grip was firm without being aggressive, and his eye contact was direct, but not challenging. He was clearly someone who was used to reading people quickly and making judgments based on first impressions. "Can I get you something to drink?" Linda asked, already moving toward the kitchen. "I have wine, beer, or Miguel's favorite, club soda with lime." "Club soda sounds perfect," I said, figuring it was safest to follow Miguel's lead. We sat in Linda's living room making small talk about my flight, the weather, and Miguel's drive up from Boston. The conversation was perfectly pleasant and completely surface level, like we were all carefully avoiding saying anything that might reveal too much too quickly. Linda kept glancing between us with the expression of someone who was trying to manage a situation that could go either way. "So Jake," Miguel said after we'd exhausted the topic of New England traffic patterns, "Linda tells me you're a graphic designer." "That's right. Mostly freelance work, some local clients, some projects for companies in other cities." "That must be unpredictable. Income-wise, I mean." There it was. The first real question, disguised as casual interest, but clearly designed to determine whether I was financially stable enough to be trusted with his recently divorced sister. "It can be," I admitted. "But I've been building a solid client base over the past few years, and I've gotten better at managing the feast or famine cycles that come with freelance work." "And you're planning to stay in Millbrook long-term?" Linda shot him a warning look, but Miguel seemed genuinely curious rather than accusatory. "I am. I know it might seem like an unusual place for someone in my field to set up shop, but I found there's actually quite a bit of demand for design, work in small towns, Local businesses that need websites and marketing materials, organizations that need updated branding. Plus, technology makes it possible to work with clients anywhere. Miguel nodded thoughtfully. Linda mentioned you recently turned down a job in Portland. I did. That must have been a difficult decision. I glanced at Linda, who was watching our conversation with the intensity of someone monitoring a delicate negotiation. It was, I said. But it was also the easiest decision I've made in a long time, once I realized what I'd be giving up by leaving. And what would you be giving up? A life that actually fits me. A community where I feel connected. The chance to build something meaningful with someone I care about. The room got quiet for a moment, and I worried I'd said too much too quickly. But Miguel's expression had softened slightly, and Linda was smiling in a way that suggested I'd given the right answer. Dinner was less tense than I'd expected. Linda had made something that required actual cooking, not just heating things up or assembling ingredients, but the kind of meal that demonstrated effort and care. Miguel seemed to relax as the evening went on, and the conversation shifted, from subtle interrogation to more natural getting-to-know-you topics. I learned that Miguel had been married for 15 years to a woman named Carmen, who worked as a pediatric nurse. They had 2 teenage daughters who were apparently excellent, students and competitive swimmers. Miguel showed me pictures on his phone, and his face lit up in a way that made it clear that being a father was the role he took most seriously. Linda's always been the artistic one in the family, Miguel said as we finished the main course. Even when we were kids, she was always drawing or making things with her hands. I was the practical one, focused on math and science and planning for the future. Someone had to be, Linda said. Miguel started saving for retirement when he was 12 years old. I did not start saving for retirement when I was 12. You started a college fund when you were 12, which is almost the same thing. Miguel laughed, and it was the first completely genuine moment we'd had all evening. Okay, maybe I was a little obsessive about planning ahead, but it worked out. I was able to help Linda with college expenses, and now I can help my own daughters with theirs. He's been trying to take care of everyone else since our parents died, Linda said, reaching across the table to squeeze her brother's hand. Sometimes, to his own detriment. And sometimes you need someone to take care of you, Miguel replied, looking directly at me, even when you insist you don't. There was something in the way he said it that felt like both a warning and an invitation. Like he was telling me that Linda was someone worth protecting, but also that he might be willing to trust me with that responsibility. After dinner, Linda went to the kitchen to make coffee, leaving Miguel and me alone in the living room. I braced myself for whatever direct conversation he'd been saving for when his sister wasn't there to moderate. "Jake," he said, settling back into his chair. "I need to ask you something, and I hope you'll give me an honest answer." "Of course." "What are your intentions with my sister?" It was such an old-fashioned question that I almost smiled, but the seriousness in Miguel's voice stopped me. This wasn't about being overprotective or old-fashioned. This was about a man who loved his sister and had watched her go through a difficult divorce and was trying to determine whether I was going to add to her happiness or her pain. "I intend to love her as well as I can for as long as she'll let me," I said. "I intend to support her dreams and encourage her independence and never make her feel like she has to choose between being herself and being with me." Miguel studied my face for a long moment. "Those are good intentions. Do you think you can follow through on them?" "I think I can try. I think that's all anyone can promise, really. To try as hard as they can to be worthy of someone's trust." Linda's been hurt, Jake. Not just by her divorce, but by years of feeling invisible in her own life. She's just starting to remember who she is outside of all the roles she's played for other people. That's a delicate process. I understand that. I don't want to interrupt that process, or try to speed it up or slow it down. I just want to be part of it, if she wants me to be. Miguel nodded slowly. She does want you to be part of it. That's obvious to anyone who sees you two together. The question is whether you understand what that means. What do you think it means? I think it means being patient when she's figuring things out. I think it means supporting her when people have opinions about your relationship. I think it means being secure enough in yourself that you don't need her to prove her love by changing who she is. Linda returned with coffee before I could respond. but I found myself thinking about Miguel's words for the rest of the evening. We talked about lighter topics: Miguel's daughter's swimming competitions, Linda's plans for the art department's spring show, my latest design projects. But underneath the pleasant conversation, I could feel something shifting. Miguel was evaluating me, but he was also beginning to accept me. When it came time for me to leave, Miguel walked me to the door while Linda finished cleaning up in the kitchen. "Jake," he said quietly, "I want you to know that I see how happy Linda is. I haven't seen her like this in years, maybe ever." "I'm happy too," I said. "Happier than I knew was possible." "Good, because if you hurt her, I'll have to kill you. Not immediately, but eventually. Probably make it look like an accident." He said it with such a straight face that for a moment I wasn't sure if he was joking. "Miguel, I'm kidding," he said, but his smile was still serious around the edges. "Mostly kidding. Just take care of her, okay?" "I will." Linda appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "Are you two plotting something?" "Just getting to know each other," Miguel said, giving me one final appraising look. "Jake, it was good to meet you. I hope we'll see more of each other." "I hope so too." I walked home through the quiet streets of Millbrook feeling like I'd passed some kind of test I hadn't known I was taking. The evening hadn't been as confrontational as I'd feared, but it had been more emotionally intense than I'd expected. Miguel clearly loved his sister deeply, and while he hadn't given me his unconditional blessing, I felt like I'd earned at least his provisional approval. The next morning, Linda called me early. "How do you think that went?" she asked without preamble. "Better than I expected. Your brother's intimidating, but I like him. He likes you too. He told me so after you left." "Really?" "Really. He said you seem genuine, and that you look at me like I'm the most interesting person in the room. You are the most interesting person in the room. Even when the room also contains my overprotective brother who could probably ruin your credit score with a few phone calls. Especially then." Linda laughed, and I could hear the relief in it. "I was so nervous about you two meeting. Miguel's opinion matters. To me, probably more than it should. It matters because you love him and he loves you. That's not a bad thing. No, it's not. And now that he's met you and approved, I can stop worrying about whether my family will support this relationship." "Does that mean you're officially not having second thoughts about us?" "Jake, I haven't had second thoughts about us since that first night you stayed for dinner. But it's nice to know that the people I care about can see what I see in you." We made plans to spend the day together, showing Miguel around Millbrook and introducing him to the places that had become important in our relationship. We started with breakfast at the Bluebird Diner, where Miguel charmed the waitress by asking about the history of the building and genuinely listening to her stories about the restaurant's previous owners. Then we walked through downtown, stopping at Tom's antique shop so Miguel could meet my landlord and mentor. Tom and Miguel hit it off immediately, bonding over their shared appreciation for craftsmanship and quality materials. Miguel was fascinated by Tom's restoration work, and Tom seemed pleased to have someone who understood the patience and skill required to bring old furniture back to life. "Your landlord's an interesting character," Miguel said as we left the shop. "He clearly thinks highly of you. Tom's been good to me. He's taught me a lot about the value of taking time to do things right. Important lesson, especially in relationships." We spent the afternoon at the community garden, where Linda showed Miguel her small plot and the vegetables she'd been growing since spring. Miguel seemed genuinely impressed by her tomatoes and asked detailed questions about soil composition and growing seasons. Watching them together, I could see the family resemblance, not just in their physical features, but in their way of approaching new information with genuine curiosity. That evening, Miguel took us out to dinner at the nicest restaurant within 30 miles of Millbrook, which turned out to be a farm-to-table place that specialized in locally sourced ingredients and had exactly the kind of thoughtful, unpretentious atmosphere that suited all three of us. Over dinner, Miguel told us stories about Linda's childhood that she pretended to be embarrassed by but clearly loved hearing. He talked about her first art show, which she'd organized in their garage when she was 10 years old, charging neighborhood kids a nickel to see her drawings and sculptures made from aluminum foil and construction paper. "She was always organizing something," Miguel said. Art shows, talent competitions, elaborate games that required hours of preparation, and costumes made from whatever she could find around the house. "You make me sound like a tiny dictator," Linda protested. You were a tiny dictator, but a creative, benevolent one. What about Miguel? I asked. What was he like as a kid? Serious, Linda said immediately. He was the kid who actually read the instruction manuals that came with toys. He organized his closet by color and season. He made lists of his Christmas presents in November so he could start writing thank you notes early. I was organized, Miguel corrected. There's a difference. You were 8 years old and you had a filing system for your baseball cards. And that filing system helped me identify which cards were valuable when I sold my collection to help pay for college. See, Linda said to me, practical. Even his childhood hobbies were investments. But there was affection in her teasing, and I could see how much she valued having her brother's steadiness to balance her spontaneity. They had the kind of sibling relationship that had been tested by time and loss and had come out stronger on the other side. After dinner, we went back to Linda's house for dessert and more conversation. Miguel was flying back to Boston the next morning, and there was something in the air that suggested we were all aware this had been an important weekend. A successful navigation of family dynamics that could have gone very differently. Jake, Miguel said as Linda was in the kitchen getting coffee. I want to thank you for this weekend, for being patient with my questions, and for making the effort to get to know me instead of just tolerating me because I'm Linda's brother. Of course, your opinion matters to Linda, which means it matters to me. I can see why she loves you, he said simply. You're good for her. You see her clearly, and that's not as common as it should be. She's good for me too. Better than good. Miguel nodded. That's how it should work. Both people becoming more themselves because of the relationship, not less. When Linda came back with coffee, she found us talking about baseball, of all things. I'd mentioned growing up as a Red Sox fan, and Miguel had launched into a detailed analysis of the team's prospects for next season. It was the kind of comfortable, meaningless conversation that happens when people have moved past the getting-to-know-you phase and into actual friendship. The next morning, I helped Miguel carry his bags to his rental car while Linda made him coffee for the road. He shook my hand, but then pulled me into a brief hug that felt like an official welcome into the family. Take care of her, he said. I will. And let her take care of you too. She needs to feel needed, but in a good way. In a way that makes her feel valuable, not used. I understand. I think you do. Miguel got into his car, then rolled down the window. Jake? Yeah? For what it's worth, I think you made the right choice. Staying here, choosing this life. Sometimes the best opportunities are the ones that don't look like opportunities at first. He drove away, leaving Linda and me standing in her driveway in the early morning sunlight. She slipped her arm through mine and leaned against my shoulder. So, she said, think we passed the family approval test? I think we did pretty well. Miguel really likes you. He told me you remind him of our father. Thoughtful and steady, but not boring. That's a nice comparison. It is. Dad would have liked you too. We went inside and had breakfast together, talking about Miguel's visit and what it meant for our relationship to have cleared this particular hurdle. There would be other tests, other people whose opinions mattered to one or both of us, but having Miguel's support felt like a significant validation of what we were building together. Jake, Linda said as we finished our coffee, I need to tell you something. Okay. I love you. Not falling in love, not think I might be in love, but actually, completely in love with you. The words settled between us like something precious and fragile. And absolutely right. I love you too, I said. More than I knew I could love anyone. What does that mean for us? What happens next? I thought about the question, about the future that had seemed so uncertain just a week ago, and now felt full of possibility. I think it means we keep doing what we've been doing. We keep being honest with each other and patient with ourselves and brave enough to see where this goes, even when it gets complicated, especially when it gets complicated. Linda smiled, and it was the kind of smile that made me understand why people write songs about moments like this, why they take risks and make grand gestures and rearrange their entire lives for the chance at something real. I can't believe I almost let you get on that plane, she said. I can't believe it took me 3 years to notice what was right in front of me. Maybe we both needed to be ready at the same time. Maybe we did. We spent the rest of that Sunday doing nothing particularly special. Reading the newspaper, working in her garden, talking about plans for the week ahead. But it felt special anyway, because it felt like the beginning of something we could build a life around. That evening, as I was getting ready to head back to my apartment, Linda stopped me at the door. "Jake? Yeah? Move in with me." The words came out in a rush, like she'd been working up the courage to say them and had decided to get them out before she lost her nerve. "Linda, I know it's fast. I know we've only been together officially for a week, but you've been staying here most nights anyway, and it feels ridiculous for you to keep paying rent on an apartment you barely use when you could be here with me." I looked at her, this woman who'd been brave enough to risk everything for the possibility of love, and realized that maybe it was time for me to be brave too. "Are you sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." "Then yes. Yes. I'll move in with you." She threw her arms around me, and we stood there in her front hallway, holding each other and laughing at the improbability of it all. A week ago, I'd been packing to leave town. Now I was moving in with a woman I loved more than I'd known was possible. "People are really going to talk now," I said. "Let them talk. We'll give them something worth talking about." And that's exactly what we did. 6 months later, we were engaged. A year after that, we were married in Linda's backyard, with Tom as my best man and Rachel as Linda's maid of honor. Miguel walked Linda down the aisle, and Casey organized the whole event with the efficiency of someone who'd been planning our wedding since the day I decided not to get on that plane to Portland. The wedding was small and perfect, with just our families and the friends who'd watched our relationship grow from that first honest conversation in my apartment full of moving boxes. We exchanged vows we'd written ourselves, promising to keep choosing each other every day, to stay curious about each other's dreams, and to never stop being grateful for the moment when Linda was brave enough to tell me she loved me. Now, 3 years later, we live in the house with the yellow walls and the pottery studio in the garage. I work from the home office we built together, designing websites for small businesses and teaching occasional workshops on digital marketing. Linda still teaches high school art, but she also sells her pottery at local craft fairs and has started offering classes for adults who want to learn to work with clay. We travel sometimes, taking long weekends to explore New England towns and cities we've never seen. But we always come home to Millbrook, to this community that watched us fall in love and supported us through all the ordinary challenges of building a life together. The age difference that seemed so significant in the beginning has become just another detail about us, like the fact that Linda hates horror movies and I can't function without coffee in the morning. We've learned that love isn't about finding someone who fits perfectly into your existing life, but about finding someone worth building a new life with. Sometimes I think about that morning when I was packing to move to Portland, surrounded by boxes and convinced I knew what I wanted. I think about how different my life would be if Linda hadn't been brave enough to tell me she loved me, if I hadn't been brave enough to listen. It's funny how the most important moments in your life can look so ordinary from the outside. A conversation in a small apartment, a decision to stay instead of go, a choice to trust that sometimes the best things come disguised as complications. I still have that brass bell Linda gave me, the one she said I'd need wherever I was headed. It sits on my desk now, reminding me that the most important journey isn't always about going somewhere new. Sometimes it's about recognizing that you're already exactly where you belong. The morning after Miguel left, I woke up in Linda's guest room feeling like something fundamental had shifted in our relationship. Not just because her brother had given us his blessing, but because we'd navigated our first real test as a couple and come out stronger on the other side. There's something about having your relationship examined by someone who matters to your partner that either exposes its weaknesses or confirms its strength. In our case, it had definitely been the latter. Linda was already up when I came downstairs, sitting at her kitchen table with a cup of coffee and what appeared to be a stack of college brochures. She looked up when I appeared, and her smile had a quality I hadn't seen before, relaxed in a way that suggested some tension I hadn't fully recognized had finally been released. "Morning," she said, gesturing to the coffee pot. "I made extra." "What's all this?" I asked, nodding toward the brochures as I poured myself a cup. "Graduate school applications. I've been thinking about getting my master's in fine arts for about 10 years now, but there was always some reason why it wasn't the right time. Too expensive, too time-consuming. David thought it was impractical. The timing never seemed right. She picked up one of the brochures, which featured photographs of students working in well-equipped studios with large windows and serious expressions. And now I'm thinking maybe there's never going to be a perfect time, and maybe that's not a good enough reason to keep putting off something I want. I sat down across from her and looked through the materials she'd spread across the table. Programs at universities in Vermont, New Hampshire, and Massachusetts. Low residency options that would allow her to keep teaching while completing coursework. Summer intensives and weekend workshops. This is amazing, Linda. Have you been thinking about this for a while? I've been thinking about it forever. But talking to Miguel yesterday, hearing him talk about taking calculated risks and investing in yourself, it made me realize I've been treating my own dreams like they're less important than everyone else's practical concerns. She opened one of the brochures to a page showing a ceramics studio with kilns and pottery wheels and shelves lined with work in various stages of completion. I love teaching high school kids, and I'm good at it, but I want to push myself as an artist too. I want to see what I'm capable of if I really commit to developing my skills. That sounds like exactly the kind of thing you should do. Even if it means I'll be even busier, even if it means weekend trips to campus and homework assignments and less time for spontaneous dinners and lazy Sunday mornings? I reached across the table and took her hand. Linda, I fell in love with you partly because you're someone who's passionate about creating beautiful things. Why would I want to discourage you from pursuing that more seriously? Because it would be easier not to. Because supporting someone's dreams means accepting that they're going to be distracted and stressed and unavailable sometimes. And that's exactly why it matters. Anyone can support someone when it's convenient. The real test is whether you can support them when it requires sacrifice. Linda squeezed my hand and smiled. You know what Miguel said to me after you left last night? What? He said you remind him of Dad, but also that you're different from David in all the right ways. He said David always made my dreams feel like hobbies, like cute little projects that were fine, as long as they didn't interfere with anything important. But you make them feel like they matter. They do matter. You matter. I know that now. I'm starting to really know that. We spent the morning going through the application materials together, discussing deadlines and requirements, and which programs seemed like the best fit for her goals. It was exciting to watch her talk about her artistic aspirations with the kind of seriousness she'd always reserved for other people's dreams. Around noon, Linda's phone rang. It was the high school principal calling to see if she could come in for a few hours to help set up for an art show that was happening the following week. Linda hesitated for a moment, looking at the application materials spread across the table, then told him she'd be there in an hour. Duty calls, she said, after hanging up. Want to come with me? You could see my classroom, meet some of my students. I'd love that. Millbrook High School was the kind of small-town institution that looked exactly like what you'd expect. Red brick, built sometime in the 1960s, with wide hallways and fluorescent lighting, and the persistent smell of industrial disinfectant, mixed with teenage anxiety. Linda's art room was on the second floor, with large windows that faced the mountains and walls covered in student work from the current semester. This is where the magic happens, Linda said, unlocking the door and flipping on the lights. The room was organized chaos, tables covered with works in progress, shelves lined with supplies, a corner dedicated to pottery wheels and glazing materials. There was something alive about the space, evidence of creativity and experimentation, and the kind of productive mess that comes from people actually using a space for its intended purpose. It's wonderful, I said, looking around at the student paintings and sculptures. You can tell this is a place where people feel free to take risks. That's exactly what I try to create. A space where they can experiment without worrying about perfection. Linda moved around the room, gathering materials for the art show setup, and I watched her interact with the space. She clearly knew where everything was, could navigate the organized chaos with the ease of someone who'd spent years creating an environment that worked for her and her students. Ms. Martinez? A voice from the doorway interrupted my observation. A teenage girl with purple streaks in her hair and paint under her fingernails stood in the entrance, looking curious about my presence. Hi, Emma. This is Jake, my boyfriend. Jake, this is Emma, one of my most talented ceramics students. Emma's eyebrows shot up with interest. You're the guy she's been smiling about all semester? Emma, Linda said, but she was laughing. What? It's true. You've been different since like October. Happier. We all noticed. I found myself grinning at this confirmation that our relationship had been obvious even to Linda's students. Nice to meet you, Emma. Linda's told me about your work. She's applying to art schools, Linda said proudly. RISD is her first choice. That's incredible. Congratulations. Emma beamed, then turned back to Linda. Ms. Martinez, are you really moving in with him? Emma, sorry. It's just that everyone's talking about it because Mr. Peterson saw you two at the hardware store yesterday buying paint, and Casey from the post office told her mom that Jake changed his address, and now everyone's wondering if you're going to get married. Linda and I exchanged glances. We'd been so focused on our own experience of the relationship that we'd forgotten how visible everything was in a small town. Emma, Linda said gently, I appreciate that people are interested, but I think it's great, Emma interrupted. You deserve to be happy. And he seems cool. Way better than Mr. Martinez. David wasn't, Linda started, then stopped. You know what? Thank you, Emma. That's very sweet. After Emma left to help with the art show setup, Linda and I found ourselves alone in her classroom, surrounded by evidence of her professional life and the students who clearly adored her. Sorry about that, Linda said. I didn't realize our relationship had become quite so much of a local news story. I don't mind. It's actually kind of nice, knowing that people care enough about you to be invested in your happiness. Even when that investment comes with a complete lack of privacy, even then. Besides, it's not like we're trying to hide anything. Linda walked over to a display case filled with student pottery pieces. Jake, can I ask you something? Always. Do you ever worry that we're moving too fast? Not just the moving in together thing, but all of it. The intensity of how we feel about each other. The way we're already talking about long-term plans. I thought about the question while looking at a ceramic bowl that one of her students had clearly spent a lot of time perfecting. I worry about a lot of things, said finally. I worry about whether I'm good enough for you, whether I understand what I'm getting into, whether I can be the kind of partner you deserve. But I don't worry about moving too fast, because this doesn't feel fast to me. It feels like we're moving at exactly the pace that makes sense for us. What do you mean? I mean we're not 19-year-olds who've known each other for 3 weeks. You're someone who's lived enough life to know what you want, and I'm someone who's spent enough time figuring out what doesn't work to recognize something that does. We're not rushing into anything. We're choosing each other deliberately. Linda nodded slowly. That's a good way to put it. Deliberate choice instead of impulsive decision. Exactly. And even if we are moving fast by some people's standards, so what? Life doesn't wait for you to be ready. Sometimes you have to be brave enough to jump when the opportunity presents itself. We finished helping with the art show setup, which mostly involved hanging student paintings and arranging sculptures on pedestals in the school's main hallway. It was clear that Linda was respected and liked by both her colleagues and her students. People sought out her opinion on placement and lighting, and she moved through the process with the confidence of someone who'd been organizing these events for years. Watching her in her professional environment, I saw another facet of who she was. Not just the woman who made me dinner and talked about pottery glazes, but someone who had built a career around helping young people discover their creative abilities. It was obvious that she was good at her job, but more than that, she genuinely cared about her students' success in a way that went beyond just teaching technique. She's amazing, isn't she? The voice belonged to another teacher, a woman about Linda's age who'd been watching me watch Linda arrange a display of mixed media pieces. She really is. I'm Sarah, by the way. I teach English down the hall. Jake, nice to meet you. You're the one who convinced her to apply to graduate school. I was surprised. She told you about that? Linda and I have lunch together most days. She's been talking about getting her MFA for years, but she always had some excuse for why it wasn't the right time. Then suddenly last week she's gathering application materials and talking about summer intensives. Sarah adjusted the placement of a student painting, then turned back to me. I don't know what you said to her, but whatever it was, it worked. She's been different lately, more confident, more willing to take up space and ask for what she wants. I think she was ready to make those changes. I just happened to be around when she decided to do it. Maybe. But sometimes we all need someone who believes in us before we can believe in ourselves. That evening, Linda and I went to dinner at a restaurant in the next town over, partly because we wanted to celebrate her decision to apply to graduate school, and partly because we wanted to have a conversation without running into half of Millbrook. Over dinner, Linda told me more about her artistic goals and what she hoped to gain from a graduate program. She talked about techniques she wanted to learn, about pushing her work in new directions, about the possibility of eventually showing her pieces in galleries instead of just local craft fairs. "I've been playing it safe for so long," she said over dessert. "Not just with my art, but with everything. Making choices based on what seemed reasonable instead of what excited me. And now I'm thinking maybe reasonable is overrated. Maybe the worst thing that could happen isn't failure, but never finding out what I'm capable of. That's a good philosophy for life in general, not just art. Is that what you did when you decided to stay here? Chose excitement over reasonable?" I thought about it while finishing my coffee. "I think I chose authenticity over safety. The Portland job was the reasonable choice, the next logical step in a career trajectory that looked good on paper. But staying here, building a life with you, that felt real in a way that nothing had felt real in a long time." "Do you ever regret it?" "Never. Do you ever regret telling me you loved me?" "Only when you leave your coffee cup in the sink, instead of putting it in the dishwasher. I'll work on that." I'm kidding. Well, mostly kidding. But no, I don't regret it. Best decision I've made in decades. The drive back to Millbrook was quiet and comfortable. The kind of silence that comes when two people are thinking their own thoughts but enjoying each other's company. When we got back to Linda's house, we sat on the front porch with glasses of wine, talking about her graduate school applications and my latest design projects and all the ordinary details that make up a shared life. "Jake," Linda said as we were finishing our wine, "I want to ask you something, and I want you to think about it before you answer." "Okay. What would you think about us getting married?" The question hung in the air between us. Not exactly a proposal, but definitely more than idle speculation. "Is that something you want?" I asked. "I think it is. Not right away, not tomorrow, but eventually. I want to build something permanent with you. I want to make promises we can count on." I set down my wine glass and turned to face her fully. "I want that too. I want all of it. The promises, the permanence, the legal and emotional commitment to building a life together. Even though we've only been together for a few months, especially because of how much has happened in these few months. Look at everything we've already navigated together. Your divorce aftermath, my career uncertainty, meeting each other's families, deciding to live together. If we can handle all that and come out stronger, I think we can handle whatever comes next." Linda smiled. And it was the kind of smile that made me understand why people write songs about moments like this. "So, that's a yes?" "That's a yes. When you're ready, if you're ready, I want to marry you." "What if I'm ready now?" "Then I guess we should start planning a wedding." We talked until late that night about what kind of wedding we'd want, where we'd want to live long-term, how we'd navigate the practical aspects of combining our lives more formally. It was the kind of conversation that feels both intimate and practical, the way couples talk when they're serious about building a future together. The next few weeks flew by in a blur of graduate school applications, wedding planning conversations, and the ordinary business of daily life. Linda threw herself into her MFA applications with the same intensity she brought to everything else, spending evenings crafting artist statements and gathering portfolio materials. I helped where I could, mostly by cooking dinner while she worked, and offering opinions on which pieces best represented her artistic development. It was fascinating to watch her approach her own work with the same careful attention she gave to her students, analyzing her growth as an artist and articulating her goals for the future. "I'm nervous," she admitted one evening as she sealed the last of her application envelopes. "What if I don't get in anywhere? What if my work isn't good enough? Then you'll apply again next year, or you'll find other ways to challenge yourself artistically. But Linda, your work is absolutely good enough. I've seen the way people respond to your pieces at craft fairs. I've watched your students learn from you. You're not taking a shot in the dark here. You're applying as someone who's already proven she has talent and dedication. When did you become so wise about artistic careers? When I fell in love with an artist. 3 weeks later, Linda got her first acceptance letter, then a second. By the end of the month, she'd been accepted to 3 different programs, including her top choice, a low-residency MFA program that would allow her to continue teaching while completing her degree. We celebrated at the Bluebird Diner, where the waitress brought us a piece of cake with a candle in it when Linda told her about the acceptances. Word of Linda's graduate school success spread through town with the same efficiency as news of our relationship had, and over the next few days, she received congratulations from students, colleagues, and neighbors who'd watched her artistic journey with interest. "I can't believe I almost didn't apply," Linda said as we walked home from dinner that night. "I can't believe I spent so many years convincing myself I wasn't ready." You were ready when you were ready. Maybe you needed everything else in your life to settle into place before you could take this kind of risk. Maybe. Or maybe I needed someone who believed in me before I could believe in myself. You would have gotten there eventually. Would I? I'm not so sure. I think I might have kept finding excuses indefinitely if you hadn't shown up and disrupted my careful, reasonable life. We were passing the hardware store where Emma had said people had seen us buying paint, and I realized how much had changed. Since those early days when our relationship had been the subject of curious speculation, now we were just part of the fabric of the community. Another couple building a life together in a town that had watched us fall in love. "Linda," I said, stopping in front of the bookstore where she'd given me that first book about solitude, "will you marry me?" It wasn't the most romantic proposal in the history of proposals. No ring, no elaborate planning, just a sudden certainty that I wanted to make our commitment official right there on Main Street where our relationship had become part of the local story. "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes, absolutely yes." We kissed right there on the sidewalk, and I thought about how perfect it was that we were getting engaged in the same place where I'd first realized I was falling in love with her. Not in some exotic location or carefully orchestrated moment, but right here in the middle of our ordinary, extraordinary life. "We should probably get a ring," I said when we finally broke apart. "We should probably get a lot of things. But right now, I just want to go home and call Miguel and tell him he's going to have to give a speech at our wedding. He's going to love that. He's going to pretend to hate it and then spend 3 months crafting the perfect toast." We walked home engaged, stopping every few steps to kiss again and laugh at the improbability of it all. A year ago, I'd been living alone above Tom's antique shop, planning an escape to Portland and a career that looked good on paper but didn't feel like mine. Linda had been newly divorced and trying to remember who she was outside of her marriage. Now we were planning a wedding and a future that included graduate school and art shows and all the beautiful complications that come with building something real together. It wasn't the life either of us had imagined for ourselves, but it was better than anything we could have planned. The wedding happened 6 months later in Linda's backyard, with flowers from the community garden and a cake made by the same bakery I designed a logo for when I first decided to stay in Millbrook. Miguel walked Linda down the aisle, and Tom stood up as my best man, wearing a suit he'd borrowed from his nephew and the expression of gruff affection. We wrote our own vows, promising to support each other's dreams even when they seemed impractical, to choose courage over comfort, and to never stop being grateful for the moment when Linda was brave enough to tell me she loved me, and I was brave enough to listen. Rachel cried through the entire ceremony, then gave a maid of honor speech that was equal parts touching and hilarious, including a detailed account of how she'd known we were perfect for each other from the moment she'd watched me help Linda with a computer problem and seen the way we looked at each other. Miguel's toast was indeed perfect, a thoughtful reflection on the importance of taking calculated risks and the difference between settling for what's easy and choosing what's worth fighting for. He welcomed me to the family officially and told Linda he'd never seen her happier. Emma and several of Linda's other students came to the reception, along with what felt like half of Millbrook. It was the kind of celebration that happens when a community has invested in a relationship from the beginning, when people feel like they've been part of the story and want to celebrate its happy ending. Or rather, its happy beginning. Now, 2 years later, Linda is halfway through her MFA program, creating pottery pieces that are more complex and ambitious than anything she'd attempted before. She still teaches high school art, but she's also started offering weekend workshops for adults and has had her work featured in several regional galleries. I've expanded my design business to include 3 part-time employees and clients throughout New England. We bought Linda's house from her landlord and turned the garage into a proper pottery studio with a kiln and professional-grade equipment. The age difference that seemed so significant in the beginning has become just another detail about us. Like the fact that Linda puts hot sauce on everything, and I still can't remember to put my coffee cup in the dishwasher. We've learned that love isn't about finding someone who fits perfectly into your existing life, but about finding someone worth building a new life with. We travel sometimes. Long weekends to visit Linda's graduate program campus, trips to pottery, shows and art fairs, visits to Miguel and Carmen and their daughters in Boston. But we always come home to Millbrook, to this community that watched us fall in love and supported us through all the ordinary challenges of building a life together. Sometimes I think about that morning when I was packing to move to Portland, surrounded by boxes and convinced I knew what I wanted. I think about how different my life would be if Linda hadn't been brave enough to tell me she loved me, if I hadn't been brave enough to unpack those boxes and stay. People ask me sometimes if I ever regret giving up the opportunity in Portland, if I ever wonder what might have been if I'd followed the original plan. The answer is always the same. I can't regret choosing a life that feels this right, this full of possibility and partnership and daily joy. The brass bell Linda gave me that first week still sits on my desk, a reminder that the most important journey isn't always about going somewhere new. Sometimes it's about recognizing that you're already exactly where you belong, and being brave, enough to fight for what you found. Last month, Linda and I started talking about having a baby. We're both older than most first-time parents, and there are no guarantees about what the future holds. But we've learned that the best things in life rarely come with guarantees. They come with hope and hard work, and the willingness to take chances on love, even when the timing isn't perfect and the circumstances aren't ideal. Because if there's one thing our relationship has taught me, it's that perfect timing is a myth. The right time is when you're brave enough to choose what matters over what's safe, when you're willing to bet on love even when the odds seem uncertain. Linda was 54 when she told me she loved me, and her friends thought she was crazy. I was 29 and about to move across the country for a job I didn't really want. Neither of us was looking for a relationship that would change everything. But sometimes the best things happen when you're not looking for them. When you're brave enough to say what you feel and honest enough to listen when someone else says what they feel back. Sometimes love shows up disguised as an interruption to your carefully laid plans, and the wisest thing you can do is let it interrupt everything. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.